You guys may remember Katrin. She was here last year for the Saxon album ranking, and she brought her friend Mari along today, because for Manowar you've got to double your efforts. Furthermore, I've been digging deep into my archive to find some old interviews with the band. So watch this not just for the looks, but also for the information you're going to get. There are reasons why this was the only new album within the last decade. Manowar preferred to reissue old albums afterwards. The lack of new ideas was obvious, for example in Manowar, a lame copy of songs like Metal Warriors or Warriors of the World. Two songs are fairly original, Born in the Grave and El Gringo with its soundtrack ingredients. But almost everything they did on Lord of Steel, they've done better before. Later there was an incomplete and half-hearted release called The Final Battle Volume 1 in 2019, which didn't help either to put them back on track. Since then, we waited 6 years in vain for Volume 2. At the beginning of the new millennium, a change of priorities took place at the Manowar camp. Instead of making new studio albums regularly like in the 80s and 90s, they now issued live albums, mini-albums and plenty of videos, Hell on Earth 2, 3, 4 and whatever. Gods of War was eagerly anticipated after many not-so-essential releases. It does feature great songs like King of Kings and Loki, God of Fire. That's Manowar doing what they do best. Between the songs there are numerous breaks though. You are waiting for interludes, choir singing, instrumentals, spoken word parts, until 5 minutes later the next song starts. While it makes sense during the first listen as you anticipate the unfolding story, by the 10th listen you may want to skip certain sections and get to the songs. Unless you possess greater patience than me. After the 4 early Manowar albums, the 5th LP and first release on Atlantic Records was decidedly different, but with hindsight the doorstep to the most successful years of Manowar. While tracks like Fighting the World and the re-recorded Defender are awesome, Blow Your Speakers reminds me of Kiss rather than a serious metal band, and Carry On makes me cringe. But with much more aggressive tunes like Black Wind, Fire and Steel and Violence and Bloodshed, this is altogether still a good album. In an interview with Metal Hammer magazine 1989, Joey mentioned that he was not satisfied how Battle Hymns turned out in production quality, especially it wasn't heavy enough, he said. Since then it became the first album to be remade. I'm not a fan of remakes and usually prefer the originals. But if you have opportunities like letting Christopher Lee speak the lines once spoken by Orson Welles, it surely is a temptation to try. In this case, I like both renditions. With songs like Shell Shock, Metal Days and the namesake song Manowar, Battle Hymns remained a classic, even if other albums exceeded it due to growing experience in songwriting. According to an interview with Joey and Eric in Metal Hammer magazine, Manowar were fired by their record company after this album for not being commercial enough. Released only 8 months after Hail to England and recorded back-to-back with it at the Phase 1 studios in Toronto, Sign of the Hammer seems to be the B selection of songs. Inevitably. Just imagine you are at the studio and you just recorded 15 songs, enough for 2 albums in a time when 35 minutes sufficed for an LP. Now, let's say there is one of the most brutal songs you've ever written called Kill with Power. Will you put it out now on your new album, or will you put it on a shelf to be released who knows when on the next release? No, of course you put it out now, so this is why the song is on Hail to England, not on Sign of the Hammer. Another point is, maybe due to lack of time, the mix of the LP was raw and uneven, with bass and drums oftentimes overpowering the guitars. In the end, the fourth album did little to advance Manowar's sound from the first three albums. Sorry for a short break, had to get beer first. The best songs of the LP are the memorable title track Sign of the Hammer, Thor the Powerhead, and the ballad Mountains, which builds up from a melodic beginning to a powerful ending. The album is fine, but definitely not exceeding Hail to England. Released in the mid-90s, the time when the press said metal is dead, Louder Than Hell was an important statement that Manowar continued with true metal, and on the tour for this album you could meet thousands of metalheads who didn't care for any modern trends. This experience for me personally was such a relief after all the crap you got on MTV. Louder Than Hell is not the most experimental album by Manowar. They are playing safe and rely on the mid-tempo, sing-along tunes mostly. The Gods Made Heavy Metal and King are my favorite songs. On the other hand, Number One, with its silly lyrics, We've come for the number one, not the number two, hits rock bottom. Manowar's most selling album, Triumph of Steel. Why didn't I put it higher in my ranking then? Because of the first song. They bragged so much about making a 28-minute song like Achilles, Agony and Ecstasy, but its writing is far from what more progressive bands occasionally did. Achilles is just different bits that could have been different songs but were stitched together so it could be called one big epic. I'd praise the songs afterwards much more, like Metal Warriors with its immortal line Wimps and Posers Leave the Hall, or the chilling Spirit Horse of the Cherokee. But in my view, there were a couple of Manowar albums stronger than this. 4 of them precisely. This is the perfect album to demonstrate the variety in Manowar's music. In an interview with Rock Hard magazine, Joey said, "It's more extreme in every direction. The speed metal, more speed, the classical music, more classical, and so on." That's a good description how the style of Manowar was expanded here. They have fast, aggressive songs like House of Death, the slow Swords in the Wind, Eric Adams' opera singing in Nessun Dorma, as well as the catchy fans anthem Warriors of the World. Deserves to be mentioned very closely to the 3 ultimate classics of the band. In an interview with Kerrang! Magazine, Joey said, "The idiots at Capitol Records in America had no idea how to market us. We probably would have folded had it not been for the support we got from England." Consequently, they called their third album Hail to England. An LP with 2 different sides, literally. On the A-side, Blood of My Enemies, Each Dawn I Die and Kill With Power belong to the best Manowar songs ever. The B-side, with its ludicrous bass solo and satanic doom track Bridge of Death, is more experimental, but interesting. Into Glory Ride is considered today as one of the most important albums in creating the epic metal genre. Hard to imagine, but the initial reviews back in the day were sometimes negative. In an interview with Metal Forces magazine, Joey replied to accusations that the songs were, quote, too long and monotonous, saying that Manowar wanted to be different from the bands who wrote 3-minute headbanging songs, and even a negative review meant they were being noticed, and that's what they wanted, he said. Main songwriter on this album was still Ross the Boss, who had supported Black Sabbath with his band Shakin' Street, meeting Black Sabbath tech Joey and later starting Manowar with him. Ross is today busy with his own band Ross the Boss, and you might argue Manowar are not the same without him. Proof is to be found on Into Glory Ride, with its exquisite and menacing compositions like Secret of Steel and Hatred. If you never heard about Manowar and don't know any of the other albums, just this one record will tell you all you need to know. This is the definition of who Manowar are, still recorded in the classic lineup with Ross the Boss on guitar and Scott Columbus on drums. I don't want to talk about the re-recorded karaoke disco versions from 2014 because they should best be forgotten. Why would you change something that was already perfect, one of the best metal albums ever? Where wheels of fire burn the night, the kings of metal are coming to town, born with a heart of steel, until they hail and kill. Totally brilliant. Funny enough, the song Pleasure Slave was not included in the remake. This weird tune was not from Joey's imagination, but actually based on a series of novels about the planet Goa, where warriors keep women as their slaves. It was also turned into a movie later. Nevertheless, most listeners thought it's rather embarrassing. Did they omit it for that reason? Somehow I refuse to believe that Manowar read critics. Anyhow, I hope you had fun with this overview and didn't mind too many sexy ladies in between. There will be less of that in the next shows because I don't want to overdo it. Good night.